Shamanism is one of the oldest healing traditions in the world. In Siberian culture, a shaman was somebody who was beating drums and would go into trance and was able to predict things for the tribe community. We have the Kundalini practices that we can awaken through sadhana. It's the exact same in the Egyptian alchemical practices. They call it the double serpent rising.
What do shamanics really do?
They heal the larger population of ailments. These could be mental ailments, physical ailments, energetic ailments. There are energy healers, and if somebody went into like some trance and they felt like so much dark energy was moving out of them, shaman collapsed and somebody got possessed. So there are people who have a lot of inner child wounding. Shamans believe that inner child wounding is held in their teeth and the jaws. So your teeth hurt a lot when you're going through any kind of inner child healing. All of the trauma that we hold is actually trauma coming from our mothers. If our mothers have felt unsafe to bring a life into the world, then we hold on to a kind of trauma that we don't know where it's coming from.
Can you tell me about an experience of one such negative force?
This lady was in fact telling me that she went to a Shipibo shaman and she did ayahuasca and felt energetically tied to the shaman who administered ayahuasca. Everything that that person would ask, she would say yes to. When she went to somebody else is when that person said, someone's hexed you. They did like a cleansing ceremony on her and she says that they pulled out like a fish bone from her mouth. One other common thing that they experience through ayahuasca is light language. They start speaking in light language like hash, hoop, ha.
Anusha Suresh is a visionary leader in the realm of healing and consciousness and is the founder of Anusha's Academy of Alchemy, which creates transformative experiences through potent one-on-one coaching and immersive retreats. She has also founded Venus Rising, a vibrant, empowering women's community rooted in sacred sisterhood and collective evolution. With a master's degree in life science and certifications in breathwork, energy healing, love, sex, and relationship coach, she blends science and spirit with magnetic presence.
Tell me some of the occult that goes around in the shamanist tradition.
Bats come in your visuals, or even in a field suddenly you're able to hear bat sounds. It's giving you a certain sense of, medicine of some death and rebirth that's going to happen in your life. Shamanic breath is one of the most powerful breathworks because it pushes your brain to produce endogenous DMT.
Can I attain that altered state of consciousness without taking the ayahuasca? These shamans must go through a lot of sadhana themselves.
They take long breaks into silence. They take long breaks of isolation. They do ayahuasca, that is high doses of ayahuasca.
How would the shamans of today's era be able to foretell the future?
Even through this entire process, they told us take 3 months in complete silence. Don't speak about your experiences to anybody. In India, we have Datura, which is a psychedelic. Certain specific preparations of weed and bhang can also give you a psychedelic experience. Mushrooms are called children of the rainforest because they believe that mushrooms are our first bridge into the forest. Even before we go straight to ayahuasca, they actually say that you go through the mushrooms because they connect you to the spirits of the forest. People flip their life around after an ayahuasca journey and they move cities and countries, they leave relationships sometimes. So they're very clearly told us in the next 3 to 6 months time, don't take major life decisions. There have been people who've in fact shown that tumor sizes have reduced after ayahuasca.
A devoted practitioner of both classical and neo-tantra, Anusha guides others in awakening their full aliveness with reverence and depth. It is our honor to have with us on today's spiritual episode of the Body to Being podcast, Miss Anusha Suresh.
Namaskaram, Anusha.
Namaskaram. Thank you, Shloka. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming and gracing the podcast. Very excited for today's topic, very unusual. I want to get straight to it. Let's talk about shamanism. To break it down, what do shamanics really do?
Okay, that's a great question. I mean, shamans are essentially healers, right? They heal people and they heal communities, they heal themselves and they heal the larger population of ailments. It could be anything from having a sore throat to a cough to a cancer to, having bad dreams, recurrent bad dreams, or having been possessed by so-called evil spirits and things like that. So all of healing comes under curanderas, healers, right? Shamans, again, they have specializations. We have plant medicine specialists and healers who are called ayahuasqueros. They are trained in how to administer ayahuasca. They are very well versed with the plant medicine of ayahuasca. Then you have musiceros who know exactly how to work on the physical body and the energetic body through music. And they know how to play music in such a way that they can evoke a response from you because they understood how music functions with our brain. So those were musiceros. And then there were, herbalists and medicine women and energy holders who were called curanderos, and they were put under that general bracket of curanderos, right? This is how they functioned. Their main role was like doctors of the community.
So shamanism is synonymous with ayahuasca, right? I didn't know of other verticals until you mentioned it to me. So there's a quote which has actually come from you. Would you drink a potion that showed you death, that forced you to vomit your trauma, scream your secrets and face the gods? Ayahuasca doesn't heal you gently. It burns you, it tests you, and then if you survive, it rebirths you. Some individuals have gone to the extent of saying it was the most painful night of my life. But when I woke up, I was finally free. There's another individual who said that I held the hand of my dead brother.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's a lady who said that I was pregnant, and then the mother spirit impregnated me with a child spirit. And after the ayahuasca encounter, I gave birth to a child who has these extra psychic abilities. So when one looks at all of these experiences, we don't know what to make of it really. So tell me about it.
I think it's very individual. Just like how your relationship with your Ishta Devata is very individual, I think the relationship with ayahuasca is also deeply intimate and individualistic because she forges a relationship with each one. Like I said, for some people and sometimes it's really, really gentle. She walks you gently through the practice and through whatever needs to be revealed. Like for me, my second day and my third day was comparatively very gentle in her guidance because she'd already beat me down on the first day and she knew I was not going to fight her. So the second day and the third day, whatever she revealed to me and the way she revealed to me was very gentle, very loving, very like a mother guiding a child.
Take us through your journey of ayahuasca from day 1 to day 4, right?
Yeah, so when we walked into ayahuasca, firstly, we have to approach it with a lot of reverence, right? It's not something that you use as a spiritual bypassing tool, which is what it has become today. When you approach it with a lot of reverence and when you've had the dieta I was on a specific vegan diet for almost 6 months before I did ayahuasca. So when I went there, I was extremely sensitive to the medicine. They said it's an introductory brew and it'll be done in about few hours. And the shaman gave me about half a 30 ml, like 15 ml shot of ayahuasca. And initially when I took it itself, I felt like I recognized this medicine. Somehow it feels like I've known her. And it's a her. I've known her. She feels so familiar, like mud mixed with Chyawanprash mixed with chocolate sort of a taste, right? It's uncannily familiar, the taste. And I sat there and with a lot of discomfort almost. They had already warned us of what would happen, right? This place that I went to was a beautiful place that gave us a lot of insight into what you can expect, that some people experience it physically in the body, that things can happen to you physically. You may purge, you may sweat, you may cry, and you may have aches and pains either physically, or you may have like kaleidoscopic visions, or you'll have something that they call consulta, which is consultation. You'll have a visit from a higher being that will speak to you and communicate with you. Or you'll have something called as nada, where you experience absolutely nothing. You have the shot and you're knocked out. And when the shaman says that the session is over, the ceremony has ended, you'll just wake up like somebody woke you up. And you won't know anything that happened to you, right?
So when would each of these happen? Under what conditions? And what does it say about the individual?
They cannot predict it. So that is the soul's journey, right?
So let's say nothing happened to me. What does that tell you about me?
So they've already told us that when you experience nada, when you don't experience anything through ayahuasca, it means that the plant medicine is healing something from your generational trauma. And she puts you and she knocks you out to sleep because she knows it'll be too much for you to handle and grasp through your lived experience to heal something that your great-grandmother, your great-great-great-grandmother's trauma that you're trying to heal. It'll be very difficult for you to understand what this is, right? So that's when she puts you into nada to heal something that your conscious mind cannot handle, or your conscious mind might break if it reveals all of this, or something from a past life and things like that. But in terms of consulta and pinta and body, they cannot predict whether you are going to have a body experience or you're going to have a pinta experience. It's a very It's like the medicine understands your soul and crafts a journey that it feels you deserve in that moment. So what I experienced the first night was just a lot of bodily discomfort. So they had told us that the medicine would sort of kick in within 30-35 minutes and you'll start seeing visions and visuals. I'm there for a good 45 minutes just sitting and looking around the room, and I'm just wanting to tear my skin apart.
Why?
Because I was feeling so uncomfortable in my skin. It was making me sick and nauseous, and I wanted to throw up, and I just wanted to tear my skin. That was the experience that I'll remember, that I just did not want my skin. It felt like there was something under my skin, and I wanted to rip my skin off. Right? This was the experience throughout for the 45 minutes, and I'm tossing and I'm turning, and everybody seems to be in their own zone, and some people seem to be enjoying this experience, and I'm here sitting and wondering, what the hell have I done to myself? Why did I get myself halfway across the globe to experience this? Like, what was I thinking? I really regretted it, that couple of minutes, of that discomfort. And they had told us, when we call for the second cup, if you hear us say we're serving the second cup, come and get the second cup. And they say we're serving the second cup. I'm like, really? Like, do I have to go get the second cup? Why did I have to hear this? And then I decide, okay, I've come halfway across the globe. What's the worst that's going to happen? I stand up, and it's like a bed, and they give you a puke bucket and everything because it sometimes makes you purge. I'm feeling nauseous, but I'm not able to throw up.
That's even worse.
And that's the worst feeling on the planet, right? And I'm standing, and suddenly everything is spinning around me. And I'm like, no, I don't think I can take another foot forward. Like, I don't think I can do this. I just plunked back on the mattress, and I'm like, I don't think I can do this. I'm not sure that I can come there for the second cup. And there was already like a lineup for the second cup. I'm like, I can't see myself standing in that line and getting the second cup. And I just sat there for some time, and I'm just again tossing, turning, trying to throw up. Nothing is coming, but I'm wanting to tear my skin, and all of this experience is going on. And finally, I hear a voice viscerally, like right here and near my right ear. You've come halfway across the globe. There are only 5 people in the line. Are you going to come and get the second cup? And in that moment, I'm like turning around and seeing like who said that. And I see the person next to me is out flat, like with blanket and everything on top of their head. And I'm like, who said that? And that was the first time I've distinctly heard a voice in my head. We do hear voices in our head of our consciousness, but it's not like somebody speaking outside of you, right? And I was so spooked in that moment. I was like, what just happened? And I tried to get up, but again, I felt like everything was just melting away. My bones were melting, and it was a weird feeling. And I sat back again. I said, I don't think I can do this. And again, the voice comes back, this time much more stronger. Are you just going to sit here and give up? Or are you going to come and get the second cup? And that voice was one that I'm like, okay, I'm not messing with this voice. Like, I was out and in that moment, and I somehow gathered the courage to go and stand in front of the shaman. And mind you, up until this point, I've had zero experience with any drug. I haven't done weed. Total newbie to all of this. I don't even know what it means to have a psychedelic experience. I don't even smoke. I don't have alcohol, nothing. I've just gone there after a vegan diet straight to ayahuasca, like jumping off the tallest cliff on the planet. And I'm standing in front of the shaman, and I'm looking at him, but I'm looking through him. I don't know what's happening. And he's like, have you come for the second cup? And I'm like, I'm saying this because at this point, I don't know whether words are framing in my mind. And he gives me like less than half, like just a sip. I'm like, is that all? And he's like, yeah, she just wanted to test if you trust her. I said, how do you know? Are you talking to her? Are you talking to this voice in my mind? Like, what's happening? And then I drank it, and he's like, are you seeing any visions? And I'm like, no, I just want to tear my skin, make this stop. But mind you, I was actually seeing visions because I was seeing his face morph into like an elf, like a blue elf with long ears. And I'm thinking, what a beautiful, radiant face this guy has. Like really elfin features, like the big, beautiful brown eyes and blue skin and all of this, like an Avatar movie, essentially, right? His face is morphing. I'm looking at him saying, I'm not having any visions, but I'm actually having visions. So he blows a sweet lotion on me. So they have like shamanic lotions that help in healing. He blows the sweet lotion on me, and I literally felt like the sweet lotion went into my heart and just opened something up. And I came straight back to my bed, and I threw up, which was a very little, maybe like 2 teaspoons of something came out. And they asked us, every time you throw up, ask what you've released. So I looked at it, and I saw, and it felt like a pig. It looked like a pig inside my puke bucket, like a big pig's face. And I was like, what are you? Who are you? And it said, I'm all the body shame you've held. all of your life because of all of the, negative sexual experiences you've had, of people, not treating you well, and all the abuse that you've been through, everything that you've internalized under your skin and blamed yourself. I am that. So for me, that was shattering. And it was really like, it was very revelatory for me in that moment. And it also took me back to a distinct memory of when I was in UKG of a sexual abuse that happened that my conscious mind had blocked me from accessing. As an adult, I don't remember this at all because my mind has completely shut that memory out of existence. But on ayahuasca, I saw it play out completely. And when I called my mother and asked her about it, she confirmed it to me, saying, yes, this did happen. It was very shocking. And in that moment, I was able to also dissociate from the memory while also stepping in to rescue myself from that situation. So I was able to rescue myself from there and say, she's a young child, she's perfect. Why would you do this to her? Why would you ruin her life? Right? So, and then I started moving through portals and I saw myself, my old self dying. And that's something that people experience, death, right?
Yeah.
So this part of me that was holding on to so much shame and blame and guilt on myself, that it's because of the way that I looked that I had this experience and all of that, was able to completely strip off in that moment and say, and reclaim myself. No, I'm actually perfect. Nothing is wrong with me. Nothing was flawed with me. It was not my fault. I was a UKG child. How could I have possibly invited somebody to do this to me? Right? But I've carried that for all my life well into my adulthood, very unconsciously, not understanding what this was. Just knowing that there's something underneath my skin that's preventing me from fully loving myself.
So the creepy feeling that you had, the uncomfortable feeling, was it this?
Yes. It was this. The moment I threw up and the moment I went into visuals, I was able to completely surrender to the process and understand what that was. And that feeling has never till today surfaced again.
Namaskaram everyone. So we have an upcoming Ladakh yoga retreat. It is yoga and sightseeing. The module that we will be taking up is the Yogasanas module. It is a very subtle and powerful yoga module, and this comes from a 15,000-year-old science. This has transformed my life completely, and I can't wait for these tools to get to you. So please do join us. I look forward. See you soon.
There were some stories that I came across, such as shamans' connection with the other world, their connection with the dark forces, their belief that spirits inhabit the visible world, and it is these spirits that help you heal, and so on and so forth. There are also possessions and exorcism, those kinds of stories that we get to hear, people talking in languages they don't understand. What is all this? Can you throw some light on this?
It's very interesting that you bring that up, right? For a shaman, everything is the spirit world, right?
Oh.
Everything is the spirit world.
You and I are spirits.
Everything is a spirit world, and we're constantly interacting with spirits. For them, every plant is a spirit. Every animal is a spirit. Everything is medicine also, right? If you see a dog crossing the road, the dog has a medicine to share with you. And it's your spirit that is communicating with that animal's spirit to get that medicine for that moment. So everything is interaction with spirit. And it is our spirit that is in connection to the great spirit. That's what they call God, right? They call it the great spirit. And the great spirit is what we call God, goddess, divinity, is the great spirit. And they believe that the great spirit has great grand plans for us. And it's for the spirit to realize the great spirit and ask for the great spirit's guidance. So that can involve for communication between, many things that may happen in your life that will lead you towards ascension, that will lead you towards a greater realization of what you're here to do and what is your soul's medicine that you need to bring into the world, right? Like, for example, when we're talking about this, I can tell you that in Siberian shamanism, interestingly enough, terrain itself does not support any psychedelic plants to grow because it's very extreme terrains, right? So it doesn't allow for any psychedelic plants to grow. But they also do have shamans there. So how do they ascertain, how do you become a shaman? What are the means by which you sort of go into a trance or go into altered states of consciousness and things like that? They do shamanic breaths and they use a lot of music. They mimic nature a lot. They go into silence a lot. And this is how they are able to go into altered states of consciousness by going into silence for several days on end on a diet. They call it la dieta. It is a diet. So they go on specific plant diets and go into silence and isolation for a prolonged period of times. And then they go into like altered states of consciousness through that silence to access.
Take me through this in detail. How do they attain that altered state of consciousness?
Yeah, so one of the ways that you can achieve it without any plant medicine is through just altering the breath. And this is what Indian yogis had already, have already given us on a platter, right? Through modification of breath, you can put yourself in a trance-like state and take yourself and journey with it and see what is there beyond the constructs of your mind, right? It's earth-shattering sometimes, it's completely revelatory sometimes it's throws you off your window of tolerance and comfort. And that's pretty much what they would do. They would go on like vegan diets or specific plant diets, like I said, that were very high vibrational plants. They would consume only those specific
Such as?
plants. Like, for example, bobinsana is one of them. They'd have only a very high diet of bananas and bobinsana and things like that. Sometimes they would have a specific type of fish, is what I heard. One of the shamans say that particular fish was very, very high in omega-3 fatty acids. And omega-3 fatty acids are one of the key building blocks of DMT in the mind. It's what helps your brain produce endogenous DMT. So they go on a very high either fish diet or specific plant diet. Some healer and master plants are there that you go on a diet with. And you go into silence and isolation. You don't speak to people. You're just there in silence, observing nature and mimicking nature through sounds. Going into shamanic drumming. So they have specific drums, shamanic drumming as a musical instrument, modifying the breath. There's a specific type of breath work which is called shamanic breath, which is like a 3-part breath, 2 counts inhale, 1 count exhale. So when you do that constantly, you feel like you're zapped into a different world. And there's a sense of stillness and calmness, and there's like you reach a threshold where you can be pushed to the other side. Shamans are identified in their life, which means that you should have gone through a near-death experience because of a physical ailment which took you to the brink of death and then brought you back. And you have shifted and changed and transformed by
Consciously
that.
or accidentally?
It's not something that you go and inflict on yourself,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
But in your life, you end up having an ailment that takes you close to death, and then you come back a transformed person. And through that near-death experience, when things are revealed, is when they say you are fit enough to be a shaman because you've stepped foot to the other side and come back. That's what you were talking about, right? Traveling between the worlds. They're called world bridgers because they're able to travel across dimensions and come back.
Tell me about that experience, traveling across other dimensions. How is it like? How is that altered state of consciousness? What is the experience like?
It is different for different people. Again, it depends on which dimension you're kind of traveling across into. Sometimes you can travel into the dimension of where the plants exist, right? We say that plants are living one here and one in the spirit realm. In shamanism, they believe that the plants are dual living. Like one, they're living in the natural world, and the other, they have their foot in the spirit world. So you will notice that plants also are highly sensitive beings, which means that they're more sensitive than we recognize. Today, we're able to see that despite being, you've seen these reels on Instagram where they cut off a part of the leaf and you can still see the second half of the structure showing up in radiation studies. Or for example, how plants are able to create sounds. Or we know this through science that plants are deeply connected through the microbial network under the earth, that when one plant is in stress, the other plants are giving it nutrients. So we know that under the earth, everything is very interconnected to an extent and a degree that we don't fully understand yet. So the shamans already knew that when you enter a forest, you have to enter with reverence, because when you enter it with reverence, all of the plants welcome you there. And all of the plants reveal themselves to you. This is what the shamans believed in. And this was all the revealed information for them. That, take this for ascension, take this for kidney problems, take this for uterine problems and things like that. And they said the plants revealed it to us. And
So
this
plants
is
are essentially speaking to them.
speaking to them, right? So this is what kind of piqued the interest of anthropologists. They're like, what do you mean plants are speaking to you? That's just bizarre to think about it, right? So there's this beautiful book, actually, I would highly recommend your audiences to take a look at it, which is called The Cosmic Serpent. It's written by Jeremy Narby, and he was also an anthropologist who went to the Amazon jungle with the same intentions as other anthropologists to understand how is it that this is happening. But his experiences with ayahuasca really shook him, because he started seeing neon snakes, and he saw like extraterrestrial beings, and he saw these ancient Egyptian godlike beings on a boat just floating around and things like that, right? So for him,
Are
it
these
was
hallucinations or is this happening real time?
like he's having hallucinations, but it's uncanny that, we're taking a plant medicine. Technically, hallucination should be highly personalized, right? But how is it that we have similar threads across?
Oh, so you'll have individual A experience the same things and individual B experience some parts.
Yeah, as a collective, you'll have very similar experiences. Like you will have a crafted, personalized experience for you, but at large, depending on the shaman that sets the container, there'll be a common experience for everybody through that. Similarly, there was this one, the second day, we did 4 days of ayahuasca without knowing what we're walking into, right? Today, anything can happen. Today can be fireworks. Tomorrow can be a death portal. Day after tomorrow, it could be like, you have no idea what it is going to throw your way. So the second day when I went through it, I saw my heart, and my heart had like a black line across it, and I had no idea what it was, and there was just like heaviness in my heart to an extent where I cannot breathe, and I'm again tossing and turning. I'm like, I don't know what this is, and I know somewhere it's related to my father and my relationship with my father, and I'm thinking in my mind, okay, I've blamed him for so many things, but I'm also forgiving him. Can you just go away? I'm forgiving him. Can you just go away? It's not going, it's not moving, it's not budging. It's like a big boulder just stuck on my chest. I'm tossing and turning for a while, and then I go to the shaman. So when you're really stuck with this, you can go and seek support from the shamans who'll come and help you. So I go to the shaman and I'm like, I recognize what this is. And I'm telling this thing that I'm forgiving my father. Like, can you please ask this to go away from here? And he's like, just go and think about it for a little bit longer. And if it still doesn't move, then come back to me. And I'm like, well, I'm telling you, I'm sitting here for good 45 minutes easily, right? Like, it's not moving. I'm telling it, like, I've forgiven my father. It's done, because I'm approaching it from such a conscious state of mind. So he says, so you did mention to me that you forgive your father. I'm like, yes, wholeheartedly, I forgive my father. I said, but what about yourself? Do you forgive yourself for the feelings you've had towards your father? That's when it hit me like a thunderbolt. I'm like, never even thought about it from that perspective, right? Like, we don't think about it at all. And in that moment, I just sat there with that discomfort. Yes, I don't forgive myself for the way that I feel about my father, because I love him, but I also, in this moment, really am disappointed and hurt with him and angry with him. And there's so much resentment because we have all of these romanticized ideologies of what a father should be like. And if he has failed even in 2 of the 10 tasks he was given, we see him as a failure, right? But is he really a failure? He's not. And I hate myself that I'm clinging on to these 2 things that he hasn't done for me. And I'm being so hard on myself and on him. And in that moment, when I was thinking of all of this, is when it took me back into a portal of my dad being a little boy, a 5-year-old version of my dad. And so my dad's dad would travel a lot. He was never available for them. So essentially, he's grown up without having like a proper father role model. I see a split screen in my visual field. I see a split screen. One half is my dad, 5-year-old boy, putting his own blanket on himself and going to sleep. And on the other split screen, I see me, 5-year-old, my dad tucking me into bed and saying he did this for himself, but he always showed up for you. Why don't you see that? And it's replayed moment after moment after moment of things he's had to do for himself and things he's done for me. The role models of fathers he's never had, and yet the father he has modeled for me. And here I am sitting and cribbing for 2 little things he hasn't done, having this major heartbreak of my father failing me, right? I felt like a fool in that moment. And I realized, like, what have I done? I claim to be this person who's kind, but I couldn't even be kind to myself. So it really breaks your ego in these moments, right? It reveals parts of you that you've been hiding from. And it reveals it to you like a slap sometimes. It's really hard to sort of digest it. That was technically what they'd call a heart operation in ayahuasca terms, right? So there are people who have a lot of inner child wounding, and the shamans believe that inner child wounding is held in their teeth and the jaws. So your teeth hurt a lot when you're going through any kind of inner child healing. And this is true even in somatic therapy, right? Your jaw problems and tooth problems are directly linked to inner child wounding, somatically held. They see a common surgeon who shows up in the visual field, which is an octopus with multiple hands, a purple or pink octopus with multiple hands that does surgery on people. And during our batch, there were almost 5-6 people who had jaw surgeries with the same octopus showing up in their visuals. So that's how I can say that the visions are so similar, although your experiences are different. For some of them, it was like doing something with their jaw. For some of them, it was removing and doing something with the teeth. With some of them, it was polishing their tongue or something like that. But they all had visuals of the same octopus. It's a little eerie. Yeah. So there are some common entities like this. There's a robo entity. There's this octopus. There are snakes are a big thing in ayahuasca journeys. You'll see snakes of all kinds. I've seen snakes. I've seen jaguars that show up in the visions and the visuals. I've also seen frogs which have shown up. So these are very common visuals, and it really ayahuasca brings the force of the jungle with her to intimidate you actually. to sort of push you to surrender, and she'll make the experience scary unless she beats you down to surrender.
So are these all hallucinations, or they can't all be hallucinations also because there is so much similarity between the hallucinations? So then what are they really?
I think it's a mix between the two.
Okay.
I think part of it would be hallucinations, because when I say hallucinations also, see, the thing is that it's a very blurry line that we are drawing, right? When you say hallucination, anything from a recreational trip to a plant medicine comes under hallucination. When somebody takes recreationally magic mushroom, they're seeing colors and they're seeing things. That's also hallucination. But at the same time, you're having a life-altering event happen to you and you're completely transformed. Putting that also under hallucination, I don't know how right it is. Although let's say at a physiological level, that's what it could be. And this is something that I've experienced not on ayahuasca but on Hape, is what does it mean to be a tree?
It's like past life regression.
Right?
Many people experience that,
Yes.
being chopped and
Yes.
stuff. Yeah.
So what does it mean to be a tree, to be rooted in the earth and to have that time? It's not, you're not in a rush to go anywhere. You're having a stable life, a stationed life, and life from that station point. How do you experience it? How do you experience earth? How do you experience the connection with your kin? That's the forest. And what does it mean? This is us transitioning into a world that's not us. In fact, like I said, the book Cosmic Serpent talks about this. Like, what is the common thread between all of this? When you say that, oh, you're able to talk to a plant, an animal, and get the medicine from the animal and things like that, what is this common link? It can't just be some woo-woo link, right? So when he went into it, what he understood was the common link is DNA.
Double helix, and therefore you see the serpents.
DNA is the common link. All ancient cultures of the world somehow had a drawing of DNA somewhere. Without knowing what it was, without labeling it as DNA, they knew that it was a life carrier molecule, right? And DNA is light. At the end of the day, when you break it down, DNA is the only molecule in your body that can bioluminescence, which means it can glow in the dark on UV light. And that's what forensic people use to identify, suspects based on the bands that fragment and that glow in that electrophoresis gel. It's one of the molecules that produces mild doses of light, which means at the core of who we are light. We speak so much today about mitochondria. What does mitochondria do? It converts the light that we eat as plants and animals into a different form as chemical energy for us to use up. So essentially, it's a light churning factory within us. And we say that the longevity of a person depends on the quality of his mitochondrial health, right? So at the base of it, what is exchanging information with each other is actually our DNA.
To continue watching shorter pieces of this content, you can subscribe to Shloka Clips on YouTube.
There are also instances where people have done the ayahuasca and have spoken to the dead. Again, is that hallucination or does that happen for real?
I think, see, even in deep meditations, we do get visitations, right? People who've done very deep meditations are also able to account for experiences with people who've passed away, like visitations from spirits and ancestors and things like that. So that does happen. Whether it's real, unreal, whether it's a hallucination, I don't know if I want to really dwell on the fact of it, whether it's real or unreal.
Do you know any such experience with, say, any other individual?
I myself have had visitations from my grandmother on ayahuasca journey, and that was the first one. I mean, throughout the night I kept speaking gibberish to her. She was the one who carried me across different realms that I saw of. She was almost like my guide through the different worlds. Like I said, 4 days of ayahuasca, and we're talking about all night journeying, right? So what I speak of as experience is only the tip of the iceberg. So we're talking like 18-20 hours journey every day, one behind the other, right? So it was my grandmother who surfaced on the first day and kind of carried me across worlds. And I saw her being my guide through the different worlds. Now, is it the spirit of ayahuasca herself showing up as my grandmother for me to feel safe, that it's not some random spirit coming? It's possible. But it felt so real. Like some of the things that she shared with me are things only she would know, she and I would know. But then again, it's a plant medicine I have consumed, so it has access to my brain. So it could still know what I know.
Did you go back and check and validate some facts?
Many people have had visitations from grandmothers and grandfathers, and in fact even past life lovers and mothers and fathers from past lives and things like that, which they had absolutely no clue about. So it's a common occurrence. All of these are common occurrences across plant medicine ceremonies, right? Which is why the shamans bless the space to make sure that only beings of love and light are welcomed within the space.
Okay, but do you have dark forces enter later? Because I believe there have been situations where the shamans have fought between the dark and the light forces. Some of them have even collapsed after the ceremony. Can you tell me about it?
It does happen, and that's why prayer becomes such an important part of it, and smudging becomes such an important part of the journey itself. If you look at the space, the hygiene of the space is extremely important when you're doing plant medicine ceremonies. One is the energy of the shaman. They have to be it's similar to an energy worker in any part of the world, right? If you don't have the bandwidth to hold big energies and you're suddenly faced with a big energy, what do? You collapse, right? The space that I'm talking about had nearly 40 shamans. 20 shamans and 20 of them who are shamans in training. So we mean 40 volunteers who are there to hold a small group, right? It's a huge number of light workers and light warriors there to hold the space. And they begin by smudging the space. When I say smudging the space, it is smoke cleansing the space. And we have similarities in our culture. Before any major event, we would have lobhan or dhoop, in the entire house.
Also, Samrani.
Sambrani, yes, exactly. So they have very similar to Sambrani. It's called Kopal. So they mix frankincense, and that's similar to Lobhan and Kopal, and they smoke up the whole space with sage. And once they do that, the shamans first come in and they do an invocation of their ancestors to that space. They bring in their ancestors, they give gratitudes to their ancestors. They have an entire Ikaro chanting that they're setting the space up. This goes on for nearly like half an hour to 45 minutes, even before administering the first dose. So for a good half an hour, 45 minutes, they're singing their prayers and chanting and opening up the ritual space and, bringing in prayers of protection. There are a lot of protection sigils that they have around the space. They have a central altar which has different things like little animal figurines and some crystals and some blessed objects by the maestros and things like that will anchor the space, right? So when they do this, they're already setting the intention for the container. So dark forces cannot come in.
But there have been encounters with the dark
Exactly.
forces.
So they say that if you don't do the ceremony properly is where you have encounters with dark forces. For us, they had set up that space and they had already cordoned off saying, if you go out of this boundary, we are not responsible for you.
But what if you're in a trance and you step out?
So that's why they have so many people making sure you're not just wandering off. And if you are, they drag you back. There is a small space outside of they call the sacred spaces Maloka. And Maloka is like a prayer space it's like a dome, like huge dome, like hut sort of a space. And just outside, there's a lot of grass. So up until that point, they had drawn the boundary with their sigils and all of that, right? With their runes and everything. And they had shamans stationed in the outer boundary, inner boundary, inside the room, near the altar, everything. So no way you could escape their eyes because they also consume ayahuasca along with you.
Oh.
And that's the thing. That's why they're able to see through the medicine of what the medicine is communicating with you even before you tell them.
But they're in their senses. They're not going off balance.
They don't go off balance because they're so used to taking high doses of ayahuasca in their training that this small dose of ayahuasca is almost like I've entered the world with you, but I'm not losing my senses. I can see everybody's experience like a movie screen.
Oh.
So they know exactly who's having what experience very intuitively. So they know this person's having a past life thing, this person's seeing some other entity, this person's seeing this person's seeing. They're able to know all of this because they have partaked with the medicine along with you in that container. They're out of their senses, very responsible in that sense. So they're with the medicine, they're communicating with the medicine. When they see somebody going astray, they will pull them back and put them in. So they don't allow us to exit the boundary that they have set, right? But I have heard of cases where it's a shady. There are many places now. Ayahuasca has become so common, right? Any Tom, Dick and Harry who has access to ayahuasca seems to be doing an ayahuasca retreat.
Oh.
And this is the problem, right? Because they explained it to us. The medicine has energy. The medicine has a certain sense of transmission of the land. So for us, when the ayahuasca retreat was in Central America, it was this place called Rhythmia. And they told us that the yahe, the medicine is called yahe and it's coming from Colombia. It's on its way here. It was brewed just last night and it's coming to us. In 12 hours, it will reach here. So it's only 12 hours old and it's not a very different terrain. It's still in Central America. It's not like somewhere North America or something like that. So even that, they bless so much to bring it back to its potency before giving it. But we have now ayahuasca ceremonies happening in Goa.
Oh.
Yes, we have ayahuasca ceremonies happening in Goa. Imagine if a plant medicine has to travel more than 24 hours to reach here, what would be the potency of that medicine? And it has come to a land that it doesn't belong here. It's interacting with the energies of a land that it doesn't belong with. And with shamans who we don't know how to vet them, right? This place has doctors and shamans and integrative specialists and ethnobotanists who are part of the ensemble. So we never had a single experience which felt unsafe for us. But we've heard from people who had come there itself saying, we tried to do it from Colombia at some other place and it felt very unsafe. We were feeling very scared through the whole process. Somebody went into like some trance and they felt like so much dark energy was moving out of them. And then, like you said, a shaman collapsed and somebody got possessed. And these kind of things happen. Why does it happen? Because there's not enough energetic hygiene that is maintained.
Can you tell me about an experience of one such negative force?
This lady was in fact telling me that she went to a Shipibo shaman and she did ayahuasca, and she felt like for several months after that she felt energetically tied to the shaman who administered ayahuasca, and everything that that person would ask she would say yes to. So it's very possible, because ayahuasca is something that cannot be taken lightly, because it really numbs your senses down. You're at the mercy of the shamans when you're on that medicine, right? So it puts you in a very vulnerable state. There have also been cases of women being taken advantage of when they've consumed ayahuasca, if it's not a place that you trust. So I wouldn't recommend just for the fun of it, just to experience it. It's not like you're going and taking a jolly ride, right? It's something really, really serious, and it's something of reverence. So be careful when you're stepping out there to do an ayahuasca journey. Really vet the source, ask questions, find out if these people are seasoned practitioners, read up reviews of the space that you're going to, understand what is the ethos of the space that you're going to, who is the person who's conducting these kind of retreats, what is their experience like, what are their ethos like, and then walk into it, right? Because this person, she said that she felt like she was possessed by something. Even if she wanted to say no, she couldn't say no to them. She felt like anything, like from money transfer to this to that, everything that that person asked for the next couple of months, she just kept saying yes to. And later, much later, when she again made a trip to the Amazon basin to Colombia, when she went to somebody else, is when that person said, someone's hexed you. Someone has done some like what they call black magic, right? With plant medicine, when you are in that plant medicine state, somebody has done something on you, which is why this has happened. And they did like a cleansing ceremony on her, and she says that they pulled out like a fish bone from her mouth. It's not something that you can ever get addicted to. That's one thing. Ayahuasca is not something you can get addicted to, because she rips you apart, right? Nobody wants to go back to that experience.
Acha.
It scares you, right? It brings you down to your knees, and it changes your life. Like your brain chemistry is different, your life is different, the way you think is different. Everything about you is different after your first ayahuasca journey. It's been 2 years since I did my ayahuasca journey. At least now I feel like maybe I want to go back and experience and see what has shifted 2 years later. But if you'd asked me 6 months, a year back, I was like, no, I think I've had a lot and I need to integrate with all of this information overload that has come my way. I don't want to do another journey. So it takes you so much time to integrate with everything that you receive from one journey before you go back to another.
A cult is largely linked to ayahuasca, or shamanism rather, as well. And if we see the Southern America, North America, a cult has developed in a very, very big way in those regions, right? And I'm assuming it's because of this. Tell me some of the occult that goes around in the shamanist tradition. Any instances of witchcraft and sorcery? Because I've heard that you have quite a load of that as well.
Yeah. When you talk about occult, anything that is not understood by mainstream science is put under occult, right? Like Indian Tantra is put under occult. I like to use the word energy practice rather than occult. They do have a lot of energy practices because they believe everything is energy. They believe that a candle that you light is energy, a plant that you have is energy, a stone that you have is energy, and every energy can be blessed and everything can be cursed. That's what they essentially believe in, right? So in that sense, they believe in converting every object and ornament into a talisman for themselves, a talisman of protection, a talisman of love, a talisman of memorabilia and things like that. So they bless the objects also. The shamans do this towards the end of the ceremony. They ask us to give whatever objects that we have for them to bless and give it back to us as a sigil of protection and love and remembrance and things like that. So it's really beautiful to live that kind of life of deep alignment with nature. So if you call that occult, maybe it's occult. Like for example, understanding the animal kingdom as medicine. Like today, just before we began, we saw a butterfly in this room.
Yeah,
That was coming to share us. That was coming to share its medicine with us before we began, right? Butterfly medicine is big in the shamanic cultures. So we saw a living example. Otherwise, what would this closed studio space have? A single butterfly, which is, I don't think, there anymore.
She is.
right?
She's sitting
She
there.
is still sitting there. These are all sort of examples of how the animal kingdom is there very much around us and constantly communicating with us.
But is she communicating with you?
She came in to give her presence, right? Otherwise, the space, why would a butterfly just be sitting there and so calm, without fluttering around,
Yeah.
without irritating us, and
Yeah.
or even herself, or we're not worried about it coming into our faces and things like that. She's just calmly sitting there, showing her presence. And that's what it means to communicate with the animal spirits, right? When you have a visual, sometimes it's a very physical visitation
Yeah.
to show their presence. Sometimes it's a very in your mind kind of presentation, like when you keep your eyes closed and when you're in deep meditation or breath work, suddenly you see the vision of a frog, or a vision of a deer, or a serpent. These are all coming to share subtle messages to you of the animal spirit you need to embody for that day. Animal kingdom is constantly speaking to us, and learning the language of it is occult. So that is in terms of occult practices. There were so many energy practices. Like I said, shamanic breath is one of the most powerful breath works that there is.
Can I get the benefits instantaneously, or
Yes.
do I have to do it consistently over a period
No,
of
you
time?
instantly feel the benefits of it.
Oh,
Yes.
super. When I was doing a bit of research, I got to know that shamanism is one of the oldest healing traditions in the world. And as per Siberian shamanism, it dates back to even 30,000 years ago. So that means it perhaps is older to Hinduism, because Hinduism is what, some 4,000 years old? And even Ayurveda, because Ayurveda is 5,000 years ago. I was stunned to learn this, and I'd like to hear more from you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question to begin with, right? It's like dropping the bomb right on the target there. I think where we need to begin to understand this is firstly the etymology of the word shamanism, right? The word shamanism didn't exist. In Siberian culture, a shaman was somebody who, was beating drums and would go into trance and was able to predict things for the tribe or for the community. That could be in terms of when a famine is going to strike, or where there is a food resource, or when they have to move from their local settlements. Because we need to understand that we're talking about thousands of years ago, when technically, I don't like using the word hunter gatherers, but that's exactly what they were. They weren't really a stationary group of civilization. They kept moving around a lot based on food and water resources. So shaman was technically anybody who would beat the drum and go into a trance and be able to channel messages for the community, right? But the word shamanism was actually coined by anthropologists as early as 1800s, late 1800s, when they started doing a lot of research on plant medicine. They got very curious because the solution to every problem was available in the Amazonian jungle. So they got very curious, like, how is this possible? And they wanted to understand how is it that the shamans are able to know what solutions for what. Right? So this piqued their curiosity a lot, and there were a lot of anthropologists, ethnobotanists that went to the Amazon basin to learn from the shamans how do they know these recipes to heal these major ailments. But the shamans themselves use the word curanderos. Curanderos are healers. So there are different kinds of healers, like medicine healers, music healers, energy healers, and things like that. So they themselves don't really call themselves shamans. Parallel that I can draw to India is tantrics don't call themselves tantrika. Right? It's just a practice that they do, and it's a lifetime journey of sadhana.
This can be traced back to Siberia. Am I right?
Yeah, anywhere between Siberia to the Amazon basin was where, shamanism evolved.
Do you see any parallels between the shamanist tradition in terms of language and, let's say, the Indian language?
May not be so much in language, but definitely in the iconographies that they have, in what they find as sacred. In their practices, they have very similar practices. One thing that I can definitely say, and this is something that struck me, was they hold serpents very sacred.
Yeah.
Serpents are a very big part of their culture, and they see serpents and they revere serpents for being the medicine carriers. And they also believe that the serpents are somewhere even before the ancestors, which is what we believe here in southern India as well, right? Like the Nagas are a major part of our culture, and we believe that Nagas were our ancestors, and we still have so much reverence and prayers to the Nagas, and so much gratitude to the Nagas for giving us the land. right? So this was one similarity, and their reverence to the ancestors was another one. Another very interesting thing is that they also have fire rituals very similar to Indian fire rituals, where they appease the gods through the fire. Another common one, and this is something that all of the audiences will relate to, in Indian culture, we use white flowers for Shiva and red flowers for Devi. In the Native American culture, they use white flowers for the masculine god and red flowers for the feminine waters. It's so similar in taste and in the way that they follow the culture that I would say that either the ancient civilizations knew something deeper than we do today, or that there was a lot of cultural exchange that happened between the civilizations.
So these shamans must go through a lot of sadhana themselves as well?
Yes,
Correct? What is the
yes.
kind of practices that they do to keep the practice alive in them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and they live a life similar to ascetics, right? They're common people, yes. They'll have a household of their own. They have their own gardens that they tend to and things like that. All of that is common.
Married?
Married, yes, married. They have children, and their children also get initiated into shamanism and things like that if they're interested. But they take long breaks into silence. They take long breaks of isolation. Several months in a year, they do ayahuasca. That is high doses of ayahuasca. It is said that they sometimes consume like liters of ayahuasca and that kind of helps them really commune with the medicine, is what they say. The medicine integrates with them, and they become the voice of ayahuasca when they're guiding people. There's this common saying that you can take someone only to the depth that you have visited, right? Even in terms of healing, you can only heal somebody of what you know how to heal or you've healed within yourself. So you can only be a coach to somebody of the depth that you have visited, because beyond that is the unknown. You don't know, you won't feel confident taking them. So they do these things so that they know the full depth of the medicine. They understand the full depth of the medicine. And it's said that during these journeys, the medicine is sitting with them and telling them what will happen at a very high level, right? Like few years from now, this is what will happen and this is what you're here to do. And like at a very high level philosophy, it's not
So a
just...
lot of these people can also foretell the future?
Yes.
Is it because of this that they
It's
keep
because the
consuming
plant has revealed it to them, yes. They believe that the plant has revealed it to them. And that's how they knew when their community would be attacked. They knew when the community would fall sick and they would move where they had to move, where the food resources were, right? Like how would they know these exact things?
So how would the shamans of today's era be able to foretell the future, and what is the kind of future that they foretell?
There are a lot of messages for the collective that comes up. And this is true for any energy practice, right? Not just ayahuasca. Like I said, anybody who does some amount of sadhana, who is doing sincere sadhana, you're able to see things at a little higher perspective than your own human lens. Like even with everything that's going on in the country, we're able to look at it from a higher perspective, that there's some kind of churn and a change that needs to happen because of which this is happening. It's that when you're in that field, when you're in that energy field and that quantum field, you're able to see things from a higher perspective. For humanity at large, sometimes for a community, sometimes for your family, sometimes for yourself. It's the same with ayahuasca. In terms of ayahuasca, they are consuming something externally to reach that state and to receive. But even without that, if you have a deeper sense of sadhana and energy practice, you can still achieve it.
So as a shaman, I can keep practicing my craft and getting to a point where I'm in a position to predict, whether it is within myself, collectively as my family, or know the existence. But as a recipient of ayahuasca, can I know the beyond?
As a recipient of ayahuasca, you can know the beyond for yourself. It depends if knowing the beyond is part of your journey, part of that particular medicine journey again, right? Like beyond of what? Again, a lot of this depends on the intention that you set, because all plant medicine is highly sensitive to personal intention. So if you set the intention, I want to go and visit the Big Bang of when the Big Bang happened and see the Big Bang, she'll take you to show you the Big Bang. And you will see the Big Bang happen. But what is it to you in life after you've seen the Big Bang? You've confirmed, okay, the Big Bang happened and this is how it happened. What is it to you? So that's why they ask us to be very mindful of the kind of intention that we set with the medicine. Like, show me who I've become.
What was the intention that you set for yourself?
It is show me who I've become, take me back to my soul and merge me with my soul. And this is something that in somatic therapy, we can confirm this through science, right? The shamans believed that a lot of us fragment from our soul, even before our birth sometimes. And we leave the soul behind in the womb, and we birth ourselves as what we should be by through the lens of our parents or the society and all of that, and we pretend throughout our lives pleasing everybody but ourselves. And most of us walk through life completely confused. I know what I have is not what I want, but what do I want? I don't know. Purpose of life itself is a big question mark. So they believe that we are all born as fragmented beings. We're fragmented from our souls. So there's this major thing that happens through ayahuasca journey is soul retrieval of your soul. So it's said that just before your birth, and this is how they crudely put it across, they say before your birth, you and your soul are kind of like twins talking to each other, communicating with each other, and the soul kind of comes out, sees the environment. If it feels like it's unsafe, the soul remains back and you are birthed. And this happens if the mother, and this is confirmed, as I said, not in the terms of soul but your authentic self through somatic therapy, which says that all of the trauma that we hold is actually trauma coming from our mothers. If our mothers have felt unsafe to bring a life into the world, then we hold on to a kind of trauma that we don't know where it's coming from. We have abandonment issues, we have problems and things like that, but we don't know where it's coming from. But we know we're not all okay. Through ayahuasca, it reveals to you the parts that have been fragmented and kind of merges it back together, brings it back together. And for you to understand, who am I at a soul level? What is my journey through this lifetime?
How is ayahuasca different from other recreational drugs?
Ayahuasca is not like other recreational drugs because it shakes your world up, right? It's not something that you can do for fun, because nobody ever has said that I've had so much fun on this ayahuasca journey.
But they've claimed to become enlightened. They've, with a lot of LSD at one point I think in the 60s or the 70s when it was huge, people claimed to become enlightened and see the God.
Through LSD. No, through ayahuasca, they said that it broke me down before it showed me light. You cannot, like I said, you cannot become addicted to ayahuasca. It's not something that has, again, we need to understand that addiction has a pattern in our brains, right? It's because of the receptors in our brains to that particular molecule that creates this addiction tendency. Ayahuasca doesn't have that. It works through serotonin pathways in the brain, but it doesn't have this tendency of addiction like opioids do. Like LSD. LSD, again, if LSD is something that is, man-made in a laboratory, right? It doesn't give you, yes, if it's done with intentions, it can give you similar kind of experiences as ayahuasca, but it doesn't shake you up to an extent that ayahuasca does.
This formulation, the ayahuasca formulation, is it a concoction or is it available as is in the nature?
No, it's a concoction. It's a mix between two plants. Again, those two exact plants, many people have tried to understand how did the shamans come up with this combination, because it's the wine of the ayahuasca plant. It's also called the wine of the soul. The ayahuasca is like a creeping wine. It's like a thick twisted kind of wine. So they take the wine of that particular plant and macerate it with the leaves of chakruna. Okay, so the chakruna leaves is what has the psychoactive compound. It's not ayahuasca that has the psychoactive compound. Ayahuasca is a healing medicine that brings overall body healing from removing any internal worms that you may have, worm infestations, and bring about energy healing and things like that. So it's said that if you're experiencing only ayahuasca and today you're able to bring back just pure ayahuasca extract to work with it in microdosing to help you, kind of take you to vitality and health.
Oh.
It doesn't give you visions because it doesn't have the psychoactive compound, but it takes care of your health over a period of time by, bringing you back to high vibrational states. So that without the chakruna leaves, unfortunately, you don't see anything without it. You're just consuming the medicine and something is happening, but you can't perceive what is happening. Whereas if you take, let's say that, psychoactive drug, it's only chakruna, I can just eat chakruna and forget the ayahuasca aside. Chakruna, the active component of chakruna, which is psychoactive, gets burnt down by stomach acids. So you won't feel anything if you just chew chakruna leaves. You won't experience anything. It's because of the mixture between ayahuasca and chakruna that ayahuasca goes and blocks your stomach acids, that chakruna can reach your intestines and give you these visions. Which is why it takes you 35 to 40 minutes before you see visions, because the medicine has reached your intestines and is getting absorbed through your system and your bloodstream and going to your blood-brain barrier and then opening up DMT. It's taking DMT to your brain where you're having this, experience so-called, right? That's the science behind it.
You also say ayahuasca is not for everyone. Why is that?
Yes, because today I see that ayahuasca has become a bypassing tool. Everybody just wants to try ayahuasca because they want to say, hey, I've done ayahuasca and I've had this amazing journey on ayahuasca. It's become like a status symbol to flaunt that you've done plant medicine, right? Has it changed you in any way? Have you taken time to integrate with what the medicine has shared with you? Oh, no, I didn't have time to do that. I've come out of ayahuasca journey and then I'm vlogging all over the internet that I'm all love and light now. I'm healed and my whole life is just rainbows and sunshines. It doesn't work that way, right? Because even through this entire process, they told us take 3 months in complete silence. Don't speak about it to anybody. Don't speak about your experiences to anybody. Integrate with what that experience has given you. Integrate with how this experience will evolve for you also. You may have received a piece of information now. This is something that's most commonly seen, right? People flip their life around after an ayahuasca journey and they move cities and countries. Sometimes they leave relationships. Sometimes they walk into relationships, and all of this happens after an ayahuasca journey. So they very clearly told us in the next 3 to 6 months' time, don't take major life decisions.
Okay.
Brew with it. Sit with it. See what the medicine is revealing to you slowly, layer by layer. And even after 3-6 months, if you feel the same, like this is it, this is the direction that I want to go, and if it's easily all just aligning, then it's energetically aligned for you, then take the step forward. But there are so many people who take impulsive decisions, right? And then they regret it later because there's something that the plant has revealed to them, but they haven't fully understood the depth of what it has revealed. Because it continues to integrate with your system, we need to understand that when we consume even 1 cup of ayahuasca, it is changing your brain chemistry. It's flooding you with so much DMT that it's going to last for several months on end. So, like how if you would go into a darkness retreat or a silent retreat, your brain is producing endogenous DMT. Right? Without any consumption of anything, it is producing it. That's why when you come out, you're still tapering out of an experience because your brain is still high on endogenous DMT. It is revealing to you things that need to be revealed. Now, if you come straight back to life and get back to your grind, you will have a crash.
Right.
You'll have a really depressive crash actually, because then you'll start blaming your life. Like, I experienced all of these rainbows and sunshine and I'm back at this shitty life. I don't want this life anymore. I want to change everything. But do you really want to disrupt life like that? So that's why ayahuasca is not for everybody. If you are in a place where you feel stuck and you can't do anything and you haven't tried anything else, try different methods of healing. Go through therapy, through somatic therapy, talk therapy, some sadhana, some prayer practice, meditation practice, breathwork practice, and then slowly make your way to ayahuasca.
But tell me something, does ayahuasca heal you for good on any of the planes? Let's say if I have a physical disease, does it rid me off for life? On the energy level, if there's an impediment, does it cure me for life? Or mental, for that matter?
Yes, it does. So there have been people who've in fact shown, there are quite a few documentaries actually on YouTube as well, which say that they have found that tumor sizes have reduced after ayahuasca. That it has healed them by revealing to them how it's energetically tied to them. That it's actually a trauma that they have experienced that's causing this somatic symptom of a tumor or a cancer or something like that, and how it has healed them. Even in terms of deep trauma that you might hold in your mind, it's gone once and for all. It doesn't return. Like, I've never had a moment where I've come back to, feeling uncomfortable about my skin or my body or shaming myself. I've never come back to a moment where I've again felt, those feelings towards my father. I feel like it's completely left. Even though he hasn't changed at all, he is still the same. I am changed.
Have people come out of depression?
Yes, they've come out of addictions as well. Opium addictions is one of the most powerful medicines against opium addictions. There have been people who've never gone back to opium after an ayahuasca journey, because an ayahuasca showed them where that addiction is stemming from and healed them of it.
All of them, or only few cases?
Many people, many cases. Some of them do bounce back. I would say 90% have shown that they've healed from, like 17, 18 years of addiction, 20 years of addiction, and then did ayahuasca and then never went back to doing it again. So, yeah. So there have been cases of people who, in fact, healed of depression and addiction. And in fact, for that, they... at least the space that I went to, they were very particular that for 3 weeks at least, you shouldn't have had any antidepressants, anti-anxiety, shouldn't have smoked, shouldn't have had alcohol, should not have had a very red meat kind of diet before you do the plant medicine. They were very strict on this.
What happens if one does?
So if you have red meat and things like that before plant medicine ceremony, firstly your gut will be clogged because meat takes longer to
Right,
digest, right? So your gut would be clogged and you won't feel it as intensely. You'll need much higher doses of the medicine, which means you will take much longer for you to come out of the medicine journey. One thing. Second thing, you'll throw up massive amounts. If you have a lot of clogged intestines, you'll throw up massively and you'll throw up very violently, right? It's not fun to throw up violently, and it's not even like, okay, I can go and lock myself up somewhere and quietly throw up. It's like you're in such a state where you can't even get up, so you're there on the bed with your puke bucket, and imagine you're throwing up like shitloads of like 3-week-old food into a bucket. Like, that's not a pleasant experience, so they ask you not to do that. In terms of antidepressants and things like that, I think it interferes with the biochemistry of the molecule of ayahuasca, so they ask you not to take those medications. They also ask you not to have ashwagandha before it.
So it takes about 30 to 45 minutes for the medicine to act up.
Yes.
How much time does it take for the medicine to die down completely?
8 hours, 20 hours.
Oh, so you're on a trip. I'm going to use the word a trip, but I don't know.
Yes,
any
8
so on a trip
hours.
for
And you can't make it stop.
18 to 20 hours?
Yes, and you can't make it stop.
So it's a bad experience. You've had it.
That's why you succumb to surrender, right? There's no exit button.
There's no way of
exit
diluting
button.
it and getting it out of you.
No.
Ooh.
You can't, right? You're gone because it's reached your brain. It has to process out of your brain and then go out. So once you're in the experience, and like I said, Raveen and I, we were really, really sensitive to the medicine without realizing how sensitive we were. They told us, we walked into the medicine ceremony at around 8:30ish, 9 o'clock. The medicine was administered.
At night.
At night, yes.
Why did
These
they do
all
it at
happen at night. There are some ceremonies of specific body ailment healing that happens during the day, but otherwise, all healings happen through the night because the medicine makes your eyes very sensitive to light. So they usually keep the lights really dim. Even in the bathroom, there's only a salt rock lamp. So the first day, they told us that we will have the medicine by around 9 o'clock, and by around 12:31 you should be done because it's an introductory brew. What time do I wake up out of this? Barely waking up, 7:30 a.m. in the morning. So through the night, I've been through portals and visuals and all of this. Like,
And what are you doing at that point? What are people doing? Like, are they, making some weird movements?
So people, each one go through their own process. Some of them are purging, some of them are in their own reflection, some of them are out there lying on the grass just grounding, some of them are in complete stillness, some of them are communicating. They're seeing somebody and they're communicating to them. If they communicate too loudly, they take them out of the maloka not to disturb others. Some of them are going through a dance party, like you'll see them just dancing near the altar. Some of them are feeling the music moving through them. They're going through their own process, right? Some of them are crying because of the music. So it was really a gentle night, and I was able to watch the music arrows at their play, right? Because I've heard so much about it. The first night I was gone to realize anything. The second night I'm watching those music arrows play, and because the medicine is in my system, I can distinctively feel the silence between the beats and recognize the silence between the melodies and the beauty that those silences are adding to a music. And I saw them discussing that the whole room has gone silent and it's almost like they're going into a nada state. The whole room is almost like in a similar to a nada state where they're all almost going to sleep. Suddenly the shamans, they switch the music. Okay, they start playing some other music and it's all live. They're singing, they're playing musical instrument, all live, no electronic music. They switch the song and suddenly everybody is up and throwing up. The whole room is throwing up. And then after that, they switch the music and the whole room is just, crying and weeping. They're all going into weeping tears. Whatever they're purging or something, either it's happy tears or sad tears, everybody's eyes are wet. And I'm like, these guys have the power. They're able to recognize the power of music and they're able to use it for healing. And that's why they're called music arrows. And it takes so much mastery to be able to achieve that, right? And that is the training. So you can't take these things for granted. There is no way in hell you will have a live ensemble of music arrows with curanderos and ayahuasca arrows in one place, except a few places across Central America where you will find this entire ensemble, right? So this ensemble is precious. So it's this that sets the container for healing. Anything else is just like adding it to a bad, saying I've ticked off ayahuasca from my bucket list.
So from ayahuasca, let's delve into the Indian medicine system. What are some of the common plants that may have secret properties but people don't know of?
That's a great question, and I think it's so necessary for us as Indians to really root into the medicine of the land that we live in, right? Because every land has a potent medicine to share with us, and we are a land that is so rich. We are a subtropical country, and we have so many medicinal plants that are so easily available to us that it's hiding right under our noses that we don't recognize them. Like the common example is curcumin, which is turmeric. Right? Today, we see curcumin available as supplements that people are consuming for mitochondrial health and reduction of inflammation, which is our humble turmeric that is used in our everyday cooking. Right? If we could just bring in a little bit more reverence to that plant, turmeric, and use it more in our everyday cooking, not just in our cooking, but also what the West calls turmeric latte, which is haldi doodh. Right?
Oh, they call it turmeric latte?
Yeah, they call it turmeric
Oh, I thought it was
latte.
golden milk.
Golden milk and turmeric latte. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's haldi doodh, right? The properties of haldi doodh and haldi saffron doodh is not just for beauty secrets. It's actually to keep inflammation at bay. It helps your body combat inflammation. That is one of the major ignored, or so to speak, because it's become so common, we don't give it as much respect as it deserves. That's one. Ginger is another one. Ginger, we use it in everyday cooking, but it has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties and it helps combat inflammation within the body. Another one that is common is sandalwood. Sandalwood paste and sandalwood essence, essential oil on the skin is said to be deeply healing to the skin. It's also said to be an aphrodisiac, and it's one of the most highest vibrational plants in India, which is available only in India. Sandalwood is not available anywhere else, right? And it's only in the southern part of India. It's a very, very high vibrational plant, which just putting it on your skin kind of alters your energy balances and doshic balances and makes you go deeper into meditation and things like that, which is why temples use so much of sandalwood on the deities and in their pujas. And why is sandalwood used so much is because it's such a high vibrational plant. That is one example. Neem is another classic example. So in the shamanic tradition, they do something called a sweet bath and bitter bath. Okay. So it is said that whenever you're going through a phase of life that is very challenging, there's a lot of pain and anger and grief surfacing, they ask you to have a bitter bath. Basically, it's a bath that you make out of boiling certain herbs and then bathing in it, thereby protecting your energy body to process that grief and sadness. And the other times, you have to follow a sweet bath. A sweet bath is again a specific concoction that you bathe in and allow it to air dry on your skin that keeps you in your sweetness, right? So like that, we have neem, which has been used by eons for bitter bath in India. We just didn't call it bitter bath. We called it as healing bath. Whenever we'd have skin ailments or whenever we're feeling energetically low, using neem in our baths was a very common practice. Similarly, rock salt was another practice that was used to protect the energy body from evil eye. Another common example of bath was tulsi water. Bathing in tulsi, basil, holy basil, in Indian basil, is said to protect you energetically and bring in sweetness in your soul. Right? These are all high vibrational plants that we have very much growing in India. Ashwagandha is one of them that the world is waking up to today, the properties of ashwagandha, right? The ability to help you access better mitochondrial health. Similarly with Shilajit, again, there are supplements that are available, and for a very long time, they believed Shilajit was for male reproductive health.
Correct, like Shatabri was for female.
Yes. But today they're able to understand that actually Shilajit helps you access huge potential of mitochondrial health. Helps you access the energy within the mitochondria and improve mitochondria health. Again, a caveat that I'd like to use here, and this is something that the shamans say, anything that you overdo, including medicine, becomes poison. So they have a rule, they have a key of rule of thumb, right? Which they say that 5 days on, 3 days off. For anything, including the most healthiest mushrooms out there, including bobinsana, whatever highest vibrational neem, fruits, plants, anything that you're consuming, you always do 5 days on, 2 days off. Or you do 3 days on, 4 days off. 4 days on, 3 days off. Make sure that you're gaining that distance between that plant to go back to reverence. In fact, there was a recent study that said that one of the most brain protective medicine there is coffee. Can you believe that? It helps you access the mitochondrial health in your brain. But when you do coffee on a daily basis, it becomes the very bane that reduces your mitochondrial health. So you have to always do coffee 4 days on, 3 days off. So when you do it like that, then coffee becomes a brain protectant, a neuroprotectant. Similarly with Shilajit.
Most of us living in country jungles, urban country jungles like Bangalore and so on and so forth. How do we establish our connection with nature and learn to be aligned with it?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question because most of us are living in concrete jungles, and one of the best ways that we can do it is by connecting to the food that we eat and being mindful with the food that we eat, because that is something that you can connect to deeply, which is part of nature. There are many traditions in the world that believe that you have to bless your food before you consume it, right? But the shamans believe that the food is blessing you, because they say that you can't bless the food is blessing you. So give gratitudes to the food that's on your plate and say thank you for going into me and nourishing this body, because every cell in my being is thanks to you, because you're broken down into the cells ultimately, right? Because it's the same nutrients that's cycling through you. So bless me. You're asking the food to bless you. And that's your first connection to nature. Even if you don't have a single plant around you, your connection to nature begins with food. So the moment you change the relationship with food, you change your relationship to health. Because nature always nurtures health when you're connected to nature. Another very beautiful thing that, Alberto tells, who's my shamanic teacher, he's also an anthropologist, a medical anthropologist. He keeps saying that we should all convert our kitchens into a laboratory.
Or pharmacy, as the Ayurvedic acharyas
Yes,
say.
they say we have to convert it, because you cannot depend on the big pharmas to come for your rescue, because they always have a larger agenda at play. So you have to convert your food into the medicine that you consume. And that begins with reverence and understanding and seeing what works for you, right? Something that works for somebody else, like what works for Shloka, may not work for Anusha. Like I said, Shilajit is one of the brain neuroprotective agents. Another one, which is very least spoken about, is actually broccoli sprouts.
Oh.
Broccoli sprouts is said to be very, very powerful in protecting your brain, because it produces molecules that help in neuroprotectivity. It protects your brain from these aging disorders. So that, combined with omega-3, can protect your brain and keep your brain really sharp to help you gain more focus and memory and all of that, right? Like a 22-year-old brain, even straight into your 40s, 50s, 60s.
In the yogic tradition, because as I was mentioning to you, I go into periods of silences, that or the silence retreat that I just came from, at the Isha Foundation. So we are a bunch of us in a hall, and you see people getting into all kinds of trance. Not everyone, but a few, whoever they do. The common noises or sounds that I get to hear is Shiva, Shambho. And I wonder, why is it that everyone's emitting the same sound? Or they'll make serpent noises, hissing, or they do the kaka, the calls of, I would say, a bird, like maybe a peacock.
Yeah.
So I see these common sounds, and I was sort of recalling all of these when you were talking about the visions that people have and how they're so similar.
Yeah.
So
another common thing that, sorry to interrupt you, because it's just dropping in my head right now. Another common thing that they experience through ayahuasca is light language. They start speaking in light language, like ha, shuk, ha. It doesn't make sense, but they start channeling light language, and it's the same thing that happens when you're walking them through a very deep somatic experience as well, without any plant medicine. When you're walking them through a deep trauma healing through somatic therapy, also people experience this light language. And in fact, it is said that when pranic energy moves through different chakras in the body, it manifests differently. Sometimes when it's moving through the throat, it manifests as, like singing, song and things like that. When the pranic flows more in the heart, you hear very angelic octaves, like ha kind of sounds coming up. And when it's like in the third eye or the eye region, in this zone, is when you start channeling light language that is common, which everybody believes that they're seeing, golden alphabets and letters, and they're channeling something which is in a gibberish language that they've never recognized before, and they don't know what it means even when they come out, but everybody is like speaking a similar language. You can see the similarity in dialects when they go through that experience. So it's a common thread, like you said. That's what it means when you're having an altered state of consciousness, right? Because you can know, even when you're doing sadhana, when you're doing tantra sadhana, there are some milestones, some specific milestones. When you do a sadhana, this is what you'll experience, like in Bala Tripura Sundari, right? When you start doing sadhana of Bala Tripura Sundari, one of the first experiences that one has is hearing the little tipping toe jingles of her feet. you start experiencing that, or you start seeing more radiance of red, like you'll observe red color all around you. So these are some milestones in sadhana as well. So similarly, I see these as confirmation that okay, the medicine is working, like it's doing what it needs to do. That's the way that I see it, because like you said, Shambho and Shiva, these are all specific experiences. We know when we have certain pranic experiences, certain things activate within us, and we say that these are very primal experiences. You're no longer thinking about, do I look really beautiful doing this?
Yeah.
Do I look, palpable and things like that. You're just in your process. You're feeling like hissing, you're hissing. You're feeling like roaring, you're roaring. You're feeling like going on all fours, you're going on all fours. You're vibrating, you're just vibrating. You're not thinking about who's watching me. Am I looking nice doing this? Should I flip my hair this side? Should I, you're not thinking about all of that. You're completely in your process. You're in surrender to your body's wisdom.
Would this be a psychedelic?
It is a
It is
psychedelic. Yes.
Are there any such hallucinogenics in other parts of the world, including India, which can be used for purging, healing, physical, mental, spiritual energy?
Yeah, there are so many plant medicines across the globe, so many psychedelic plant medicines across the globe, right? I am somebody who, I wouldn't say advocates, but I feel like anything that comes from nature, when it's held in reverence, always has something of evolution to share with you, to evolve your mind and the way you think. So there are many such tools of evolution that I believe that man has used to build the cranial capacity that we have today. Ayahuasca is just one example of it, right? Like we have another one which is called San Pedro. It's called Wachuma. It's a cactus that grows across the deserts in Southern America and Central Northern America, and it was renamed as San Pedro, which means Saint Peter, because they believed that it connects you to God and God essence. Then there's another one which is, of course, we have the psilocybin, which is mushrooms, which we see world across. Mushrooms, we see it world across. Wherever humans are settled or not settled, we see magic mushrooms. We see it here itself in Ooty and Kodaikanal in India, that I know of commonly, where psilocybin is available, where people use psilocybin very recreationally, which I feel very bad for, because it has the potency of evolution. If you used it in ceremony and mindfully, it can really heal you. But using it for recreation, I feel, is wrong. It doesn't do justice to the plant. There's no reverence there, right? So psilocybin is one of them. There's another one which is called iboga, which is from the African origin. It's an African psychedelic called iboga, and iboga is also a cactus which is very, very potent, on par with ayahuasca, but it's said to be a masculine spirit. So it's said to give you a punch straight across your face and then really like make you succumb. They say that in comparison, ayahuasca is very gentle in essence because she's feminine, and iboga will just beat you down and just like completely like wrestle you down to the floor. That's iboga. Then we have in India we have datura, which is a psychedelic, so to speak, or even certain specific preparations of weed and bhang can also give you a psychedelic experience, right? Which is why we see it being a part of celebrations and festivals, because it gives us that moment to still and go into reflection and meditative altered states of consciousness.
Also, of all these hallucinogenic, psychedelic, medicinal herbs, why do you think ayahuasca trumps them all?
I think
because some we haven't even heard of. I've not heard of any of these,
yeah,
except for maybe datura and mushrooms.
Yeah. That's because I think ayahuasca is coming out of the hidings in the jungle today. For even 50 years ago, we've never heard of ayahuasca, right? Because ayahuasca was never administered outside the jungle. They had very strict rules about it, that only jungle temples, what I call malokas, within the jungle, within the Amazonian jungles, they would give it. The shamans wouldn't leave their settlements and come out. They wouldn't bring the medicine out of the jungles. And if you had to do ayahuasca, you had to go into the jungle, into the wilderness, and sit in isolation in the jungle and do the medicine. But later it said that ayahuasca kind of revealed herself and said that I want to be known. And that's when they started bringing it to the fringes of the jungle.
Okay.
And today we see it being more predominantly available even in California, in the US, in LA and all of that. I know of places that serve ayahuasca, although I would question the energetics of it.
So I've heard that the shamanic training sometimes takes several years.
Yes.
Is it very intense? And if yes, how so?
Yeah, the shamanic training, if you want to train to be a shaman, it is very intensive, a process for several months. You have to live in the jungles with the maestro, with the master, when somebody becomes a master healer, we call them a taita. Taita is like a head priest sort of equivalent. So you will be living under a Taita, taking care of his needs and all, just like a Shishya, right? Living under a guru for several months on end and learning from the everyday life. Like days on end, you'll just be foraging in the forest. You'll just be doing menial work like cleaning and cooking and things like that, and learning to understand the magic in the mundane
And surrender.
and surrender, right? Like surrendering to nature, surrendering to your master, and all of this, right? Only then you become a shaman. Today, we have people doing like a 10-day course and then calling themselves shamans. It doesn't work that way. I'm not a shaman. I practice shamanic medicine, but I'm in no way a shaman, because firstly, they don't initiate, like they have a rule that they don't initiate anybody who's not from the bloodline into shamanism. They have a rule. So if you do not belong to a shamanic bloodline, you cannot become a shaman even if you've lived for years on end with these masters. You can learn their healing techniques. They'll openly teach it to you, but you cannot call yourself a shaman because you do not belong to their bloodline. So they believe a lot in bloodline transmission. They believe the ancestors speak through the bloodline and they heal through the bloodline. The training that I have done is a 14-week training, and even before that in Pockets I've done like 15-20-day training and things like that. Those are for specific medicines. Like I did a training to understand how to work with hape. I did a training to understand how to work with plant essential oils, right? And then I did a 14-week sort of training to understand shamanic energy work, how to work with energy according to the shamans and things like that. So these courses are for technically the modern shaman, right? Who they bridge a little bit of science into energy work and things like that. But can I say that I'm equivalent to a shaman who comes from the Central American lineage of shamanism? No way. That would be very wrong of me to say that, and it would be very irresponsible of me to say that.
You're so articulate, such a beautiful storyteller, and you're so versatile. Can't wait to have more series of the Rahasya Gyan, as we say. Getting an insight into these different worlds that you've spoken about. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For
Thank
being
you,
a part
Shloka.
of this podcast. Thoroughly enjoyed it and hope to have you soon again.
Thank you. And gratitudes to your audiences for listening and tuning in. And I hope they take away something from it for themselves.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To continue watching shorter pieces of this content, you can subscribe to Shloka Clips on YouTube. Don't forget to like this video and follow us on Spotify. Pranam.
In case you'd like to be a part of our online and in-person yoga, diet and spiritual programs, you can join our WhatsApp group below, where we post all our upcoming programs and give free tips on health, diet and lifestyle.